Chapter 20 Goodbye and Hello. As the pleasant countryside flashed by and the wind whistled a tune on the windshield, it suddenly occurred to Milo that he must have been gone for several weeks. I do hope that no one's been worried, he thought before urging the car on faster. I've never been away this long before. The late afternoon sun had turned now from a vivid yellow to a warm, lazy orange, and it seemed almost as tired as he was. The road raced ahead in a series of gentle curves that began to look familiar, and off in the distance the solitary toll booth appeared, a welcome sight indeed. In a few minutes, Milo reached the end of his journey, deposited his coin, and drove through the toll booth. And, almost before realizing it, he was sitting in the middle of his own room again. It's only 6 o'clock, Milo observed with a yawn, and then, in a moment, he made an even more interesting discovery. And it's still today? I've only been gone for an hour? He cried in amazement, for he'd certainly never realized how much he could do in such a short time. Milo was much too tired to talk and almost too tired for dinner, so without a murmur, he went off to bed as soon as he could. He pulled the covers around him, took a last look at his room, which somehow seemed very different than he'd remembered, and then Milo drifted into a deep and welcome sleep. School went very quickly the next day, but not quickly enough, for Milo's head was full of plans and his eyes could see nothing but the toll booth and what lay beyond. He waited impatiently for the end of class, and when the time finally came, his feet raced his thoughts all the way back to the house. Another trip! I'll leave right away! They'll all be so glad to see me, and I'll... Milo stopped abruptly at the door of his room, for where the toll booth had been just the night before, there was now nothing at all. He searched frantically throughout the apartment, but the toll booth had vanished just as mysteriously as it had arrived. And in its place was another bright blue envelope, which was addressed simply, "For Milo, the boy who knows the way." He opened it quickly and read, "Dear Milo, you have now completed your trip, courtesy of the Phantom Tollbooth. We trust that everything has been satisfactory, and hope you understand why we had to come and collect it. You see, there are so many other girls and boys waiting to use it too. It's true, there are many lands you've still to visit, some of which are not even on the map. And there's wonderful things to see that no one has yet imagined. And we're quite sure that if you really want to, you'll find a way to reach them all by yourself. Yours truly." The signature was blurred and couldn't be read. Milo walked sadly to the window and squeezed himself into one corner of the large armchair. He felt very lonely and desolate as his thoughts turned far away, to the foolish, lovable humbug, to the comforting assurance of talk standing next to him, to the erratic, excitable din, to little Alec, who he hoped would someday reach the ground, to Princess's Rhyme and Reason, without whom wisdom withered, and to the many, many others he would always remember. And yet, even as he thought of all these things, he noticed somehow that the sky was a lovely shade of blue, and that one cloud had the shape of a sail ship. The tips of the trees had pale young buds, and the leaves were a rich, deep green. Outside the window, there was much to see and hear and touch. Walks to take, hills to climb, caterpillars to watch as they strolled through the garden. There were voices to hear and conversations to listen to and wonder, and the special smell of each day. And in the very room in which he sat, there were books that could take you anywhere, and there were things to invent and make and build and break, and all the puzzle and excitement of everything he didn't know. Music to play, songs to sing, and worlds to imagine and then someday make real. His thoughts darted eagerly about as everything looked new and worth trying. Well, I would like to take another trip, Milo said, jumping to his feet. But I really don't know when I'll have the time. There's just so much to do. Right here. The end. What did you think? What did you think of the Phantom Tollbooth? Did you enjoy it? Did you notice the big transformation that our main character, Milo, underwent? It might be hard to do, but can you think back to weeks ago when we started reading the Phantom Tollbooth? Can you think about how Milo was described as a character? If we flip back to the very beginning in chapter 1, when, well, chapter 1 was entitled Milo, there was the first line of the book. There was once a boy named Milo who didn't know what to do with himself. Not just sometimes, but always. Do you remember that Milo? Bored, everything seemed uninteresting, nothing to do, waiting for something to end so that something new could begin, but then that new beginning wasn't interesting to him any longer. Now, compare that to the Milo that we just heard at the very end of the story. Not only did he go on this massive adventure, which took courage, bravery, teamwork, problem solving, but he also now is starting to notice how much interest and engagement there is already in his life. He doesn't need an imaginary Phantom Tollbooth to take him on adventures. He can create those adventures himself. There are things to learn. There are books to read. There are puzzles to solve. There are materials to build. All sorts of things for him. So what Milo did was he changed. He changed through the course of this book. And we have a special name for characters that undergo a big change. We call them dynamic characters. To be dynamic means that you change. And Milo underwent a massive transformational change. He was a very dynamic character. And as a result of his adventure, it changed his personality. It changed his outlook on life. And instead of being down and looking at it with a glass is half empty sort of outlook, he saw the glass as half full. He saw the possibilities. And I imagine, now that you've been at home for quite some time, over a month now, I wonder, maybe you were starting to look at things and see them as, oh, I've already done that. I've already read that book. I've watched that movie. I've practiced that Montessori material. I've watched that presentation from Mr. O or Mrs. Garland. And I've eaten that meal. I've washed that dish. I've folded that laundry. I've planted that plant. If you are also starting to feel that way like Milo, I hope that this story, The Phantom Tollbooth, will be inspirational for you to show that while it might appear boring to you when you look at it this way, simply by looking at it another way can reveal just how much positivity and possibility there is, even in the most ordinary of situations and in the most ordinary of things. Truly, the most creative and most exciting thing that you can do will be generated by you. It will be generated by you and not by me. Not by your parents, not by your grandparents, not by siblings. Sure, they might help get an idea started. I hope that I inspire ideas from time to time, and I'm sure your very creative and hardworking families are also doing the same. But ultimately, in the end, it's going to come down to you. It's going to come down to you, just like Milo. You could be that character that looks at the glass and sees, oh, it's just half full. I'm bored. There's nothing to do. Life stinks. Can't wait for this to be over. That's a choice. You can absolutely choose that outlook and that mentality. But I think, like Milo, you will find that looking at it that way doesn't cause the time to go by any faster. It doesn't cause things to become interesting. But instead, if you look at things closely, see them for their possibilities, see them for the positive things they could bring to your life or the positive joy or engagement, then I think you too will find there are so many things you would like to do, you just don't have enough time. All right? So I hope that you too can be like Milo and can see that there's just so much to do right where you are in your very home with the very things you already have. And I encourage you to continue to see those possibilities and to pursue them. Take care, everyone.